Hey, so this is just a continuation of the Excel thing that I had done before. So now we'll work with a somewhat larger, a little more complex data set and give you a feel for some of the sort of simple tools that there are here, which is at least the stuff that I personally use in teaching, but it applies to all sorts of things. So it would apply, I'll do some things that would probably apply to like finances and other stuff like that. This is really more of what Excel is good for, like larger data sets and doing calculations over and over and over again, where you don't want to have to do them like, one at a time over and over again. And with Excel, you don't have to. So yeah, let's take a look at that. So what we've got here is, the data is actually real, but the students here are fake. These are quizzes, and then each quiz had a maximum possible score of either 50 or 100. And it just depended on that particular thing. Now there are some missing here, you see that. I don't know, I guess that's students were absent or there was something else going on, but that's actually okay. So we can look at this from a couple of perspectives, and as a teacher, anyways, which is what I'll focus on first, what I would want to see is what are the students' averages for each individual student for the quizzes that they have done, at least, not the ones that they've missed, which works out fine, because actually for average here, if a cell is simply blank, then it doesn't calculate into the average. It's not zero, it's null, N-U-L-L. It's the null data set, which means a lack of data. And so for those students, it just simply wouldn't calculate in. But but the other thing I want to do is see what the averages are for each individual tests. I'll explain that in a minute. So we're going to use that average function again. Let's also do minimum and maximum and see what happens. I've used this data before for a presentation and actually for class, but I got rid of a bunch of the calculations that I did because honestly I think there might be better ways to do it that I hadn't thought about at the time, and because I want to go over that with people viewing this. Again, this is really for one particular person, but maybe it applies to others as well. So that's why I'm putting it on YouTube. So let's figure out across this student what their minimum, average, and maximum scores are. So minimum can show you, minimum and maximum will show you outliers and can help to set a standard. And they can also help if you need to determine whether or not overall whatever you're doing is reasonable. Again, it's used to set standards. And then average, of course, is average. So I'm going to do equals min, and then I'm going to highlight all of these. Now there's a couple ways to do it. You can do it individually by holding control and clicking them all, but that takes forever. And also if you've got 5,000 data bits, or rather individual data points, that would take forever. You can do it this way, where you simply highlight them all, only get the ones you want. That's one way of doing it. You can also, and this is what I would do, if the data stretched beyond this screen, beyond what I can see here, I would click the first one, and then scroll over and hold shift and click the last one. And again, that gets everything in between it. So this student's minimum score was a 90, which we can see looks like is this progress test 8, and also this progress test 2 from a different book. So now I'm going to do the same thing. Let's give it a label, min score. Now I'm going to do an average. So there's two ways of doing this, a couple of ways really. We can do equals average, and then highlight these again. Or I can actually just take this right here. Since I know the data part is correct, I just need to change the function. I can copy this, Control C, come over here, put it into the formula bar, Control V. Looks like, did I get an extra space in there? No, okay. Hello, Janet. And I can change this to average. And now that gives me the average. So average, and then max score. So again, I'm going to just Control V and change from min to max. All right, so their maximum scores are 100, their minimums are 90, and you can see across all of these they got a 95.6, which makes sense if their min and their max are 90 to 100. And when you see this average right in between them, that should sort of tell you that in this case the person's consistent, and the testing methodology in this case is consistent. Now again, this applies to teaching, but you can use these various types of data as testing points to sort of test one another. Honey, I hear you. I'm busy. Yeah. So now the easy way to get this to the rest of them, to do these calculations for the rest of them, I can do them one at a time. I can type here, equals min and highlight these, or I can highlight and drag it down. And that gives me the minimum score for all of those. Now I'm going to undo that. Since I've got 3 of these, I'm going to highlight all 3. I'm going to drag it down. Boom. And it gives me all of that. Now I'd like the formatting to look somewhat like this. And I got 2 things going on here. 1, I changed the size and the font and stuff. And 2, I've got some conditional formatting in here. So as you can see, the lower scores, and I think I chose below 80, are showing up in red. Yes, honey. 80 to 90 is showing up in yellow, and then 90 plus is showing up in green. Let's do some calculations first, and then I'll show you guys that in a few minutes. But let's change this. So what I want to do, I'm going to highlight all of these, and I'm going to drag it across. But then I'm going to click here, because what that did is it copied these values. You see, it just copied them. So I'm going to do formatting only. And now you see it copied the formatting. So that's really an easy way to do it. Now I can actually take and extend this out and do fill formatting only. And then it keeps the correct values, which makes sense. You see the minimums have a bunch of reds. The maximums are all greens. And then the averages are in between, depending on the student. So I'll show you how to set up conditional formatting shortly, but it's super handy. One other thing I want to do here, I'm going to highlight these. I'm going to double click here. When I double click here, it's going to respace them, resize them. And you see it resizes them to what the maximum size is. But now you see this average is a little goofy. Now what you got to look at, if you remember from like science school way back when, is significant figures. All of these values, none of them have a decimal place, but this goes to, like the 8th decimal place or something. So if you consider the number of significant figures here, I believe we can only really get one significant figure for the decimal places. And so what we ought to do, we ought to reduce this down to one significant figure. That's going to be an average that is usable, that makes sense. Because with this limited set of data, and given the fact that we don't have decimal places listed here, we shouldn't go to something more significant, more than one decimal place in terms of significant figures here. So at any rate, that gives us the averages of the average, the min, and the max per student. Now let's look at, yes, buddy, I see you. Yeah, we hear you too. Now let's look at the averages and the minimums and the maximums for these. Now again, these have a different value for each of these. So, like I've got a 94 listed here, but the maximum score was a 50. So in fact, this score isn't a 94, it's a 47, right? 47 times 2 is 94. They got a 47 out of 50, but I've got it listed out of 100. The reason I did that here is because, again, they're student scores, and it's easier for them to conceptualize a value if it's out of 100. But we can convert that back. We can take the min and max out of 100. We can apply these maximum scores later. Sorry about that. Hang on a sec. right, so let's do averages here. Sorry, but I gotta put you over here in your spot. There you go. No, don't bite. Have a seat. All right, so we're gonna do the same thing, but we're gonna do it now vertically instead of horizontally. So equals, let's do min first. Min of all of these equals average, again, of all of these. You notice I'm not getting the maximum score because that's not actually a student score, that's the maximum possible, so don't put that into your calculations. Equals max. So, we have the maximum. I should change what this says, maximum possible score, minimum score, average score, maximum score. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take and highlight these, and I'm going to merge them, which you can do up here somewhere, but I usually like to just right click. Let me see. I'm used to using, honestly, I'm used to using Google merge cells. Let's do it up here. So click the arrow and you get some other options. So merge cells. Click here, arrow down, merge. Click here, arrow down, merge. Now the other thing I want to do, I want to make these bold because they're important to me. So I'm going to do Control B. You can just click the B up here if you want to. You can hold Control and click B. One thing I didn't touch upon before, there are some shortcuts you should learn, keyboard shortcuts that use Control. Control B is bold, Control I is italicized. I think Control U is underlined. Yep, Control U is underlined, but that's for formatting. More importantly, Control Z is undo, the last thing you did. Control X is cut. There's a difference between cut and copy. Cut will copy the information and remove it from the cell that it's in. Copy and remove. Control C keeps the data there but copies it. And then Control V pastes the data which you've copied. So remember those ones, Z, X, C, and V. Those are super important for manipulating the data. And then B, U, and I are for formatting, how you want it to look. There's others, but those are the ones that I use primarily. So at any rate, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take and pass these down to here. So I don't care what the minimum of the minimums is, but we can find that. Actually, you know what? Let's do that. Let's explain that. So it's more of a struggle for math than anything else. So I'm just going to copy these all the way across. Now, the maximum value for these three is 100. So let's put that in there so that we know it's in there. 100, 100, 100. Now, this is going to get confusing because it doesn't look similar. Something that we can do, we can Control C, copy, Control V, paste, but then, again, I want to paste just the format. So, let's see, not formulas, keep source formatting, merge conditional formatting, that might be it. Values and source, values and number, values, formatting. And that's just the formatting. So now, I'm going to hit escape. When you do escape, it clears whatever you've copied, it clears that from the clipboard. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to drag it down. If I can get on the thing. Drag it down. And now I'm going to do formatting only. And you see those two menus are different. What's different is with one, I copied and pasted somewhere separately. The other one, I just dragged it down. So you will see a different menu depending on which of the two that you do. But anyways, now these are formatted the same as these. And the reason that's important is it can tell me quickly what I need to work on, what I need to focus on. I don't care about the greens, they're already good. The yellows, depends on how picky you are or what data you're working with. The reds are where I need to focus. Now, one other thing I want to do here, you see these have two significant figures. I don't like that. There shouldn't be two sig figs. There should only be one. So I'm going to highlight out to here because I've already dealt with significant figures with these ones. and I'm going to make it a single significant figure. So you see 84.4, 90.5, and so on. So now I've got a couple of things here. One other thing, I want to, just because I'm obsessive about this, I want to add lines like this. So that's part of formatting. We can come up, where is it? Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't used this in so long. Yeah, borders. And you can do all borders. You can do other things, thick outside, only outside. You can clear the borders. You can do right, left, top, bottom, blah, blah, blah. You can do top and bottom double border, which is nice when you need to separate sections of something. I'm going to do all borders. Actually, let me show you what I mean by that. So if I want to, I can highlight all of this. Since this is the raw data, excuse me, here. This is the raw data. I can do thick outside, right? And then I can do maybe thick outside here. And once you've used it once, you can just click it and it will repeat what you last did. And then I can do thick outside here. And I know it's kind of tough to see with this. Yeah, there we go. I zoomed in a bit. But you see this thicker border around those things that I highlighted and applied the thicker border to. So now what I've got, I can look at any given student's minimum, average, or maximum. Okay? So for instance, this student down here has an average of only 78. That's something to probably look at. They also have a minimum of only 54. Now when we look at the minimums, in other words, the lowest value of all of the minimums, you see we got a 54 and a 77.8. And then an average of 92. So when we look at these three, we see it's this student here. In other words, it's Eddie Edwards 16, whatever. This student is someone you should probably focus on if you're a teacher. Again, I'm basing this on teaching because I do a bunch of that, but this would apply to other things too. So if you are, say you're a sales rep and you've got a bunch of customers, and instead of scores, this is a number of items bought and sold, or values of total sales or whatever through to that customer, or from that customer on to end users or whatever. You may look at your distributors or your customers and say, who's not buying as much, who's not selling as much, I gotta fix that. That's a spot that I can work on. Now, maybe in that case, you might look at it and say, they exist out in the middle of nowhere. There's not as much sales opportunity for that person. They should not be considered to be on equal footing as the other business associates. You might look at it and say, they suck. You might look at it and say, they're selling the competitors' products too. So there's different ways to interpret this data depending on the context of the data, right? And that's where you got to know it. Excel's a tool. It's a tool like any other, just like a knife. You can use it to cut steak, you can use it to cut people. How you use it is going to determine if you're doing something incorrectly or correctly. So anyways, you need to know the context of the data that you're working with, of course. So this gives us student by student information. Now this down here, from here over, this gives us test by test information. So for instance, if I wanted to know what tests to focus on, I would probably look at first the red ones. So we got a 79.1 and a 78 here. Those are pretty low compared to at least 80s and 90s for the rest. As a teacher, I'm going to ask myself, why is that? Is there something wrong that I'm doing? Is there something that's missing where with these exams I didn't give the student enough information? Was there a holiday? Was it like, I don't know, the end of the year, the end of the term where kids are getting lazy and complacent, right? If we're dealing with, let's say, sales figures or financial information, you might say, again, is this, maybe these aren't tests, maybe this is dollars, and these are different product lines or products or product segments. So if we're talking computer stuff, maybe you've got motherboards and processors and memory and hard drives. And then over here, maybe you've got, I don't know, advanced, weird networking stuff, right? Where not everybody's going to buy it, right? And so you just, Gina, stop. I'm using this shit. Don't be an asshole. Relax. Maybe that's some weird segment where, like, stop it, you're hurting me. Where it's just not a focus, right? And maybe it shouldn't be a focus. Again, you got to know the context of the data that you're looking at. But as a teacher, I would look at that and say, what am I doing wrong? Because hey, it's not a real mouse, okay? Yeah, I know you're bored. Go get your toy. You might look at that and say, I would look at that as a teacher and say, what am I doing wrong for that test? What am I not teaching them? Or is it a timing thing? And in which case, can I adjust the timing of it somehow? Yes, Annie, I see you. I'm doing something, motherfucker. God damn it. So that's what these are. Now, the minimums and the maximums, again, they're going to matter, but they're going to matter in the context. When you look at these, the maximums are all 94 and above. I'm not worried about those students so much, and I'm not worried about those maximum scores as much. But if for instance, my maximums were only 70s, I might say these exams are simply not appropriate for the age that I'm teaching them. But that's based on the criteria that I know I need to follow as a teacher. And you, in the context of your data, need to know what the criteria is for acceptable data and not acceptable data. And then minimums can point to problems as well. So, for instance, here, okay, we got a 60 and a 54. Here we've got a 58 and an 84, right? That's a pretty low minimum. If we look at that, this student, that's their lowest, and then 84 is their average. So their average isn't bad, and it matches this average here. So that seems like an average student. What I would say in this case is chances are good, because of the fact that there's one missing here, there's a 58, 80's not bad, and then another 64. I would ask myself, was this kid going through something here? Was there a sickness? Was there an illness? Was there some sort of extraneous thing that happened, right? Now, I know this isn't just the functions of Excel, but listen to me. The functions don't mean shit if you don't understand the context. If you don't know where this stuff comes from, and you have no idea what it's going to be used for, put in a couple of functions. You can do mode and median as well, and give it to your superior or whatever the case is. But if you know how the data is going to be used, then you can meaningfully manipulate it. That's what I'm trying to get to, meaningful manipulation of the data. So this is min, av, max. We can, again, I can do equals mode. If you remember, mode is, I believe mode is the most commonly found value. So if you looked at all of these, there's a 92, there's another 92. It looks like, and a third 92. So 3 students out of these 20 or whatever had 92s. It's the most commonly found value. With teaching, that doesn't matter to me, but unless I'm looking for cheating, perhaps, in some weird way. But for some other things that may matter. I can also look at median. Median, if you remember, is not, it's the value right in the middle. It's not the average. It's simply the value which falls in the middle of the data set. And that's an 86. So median can sometimes be used as a sort of average or sort of in place of an average with certain data sets. Here in teaching, it doesn't mean anything to me. That's why I don't use it. In other things, it might matter very much. That's up to you. Again, based on the context of the data. You'll also notice as I'm putting these in, there are lots of functions that come up. So you've got max, min, mid, a bunch of these, frankly, I don't even know. Minverse, minimum inverse, maybe? I don't know, minute. There's mod and mode. Multinomial. Look, if you're a math teacher or a math professor or a mathematician of some other sort or a statistician, I'm sure that you know more of this. what I would recommend is whatever context you're using this in, whatever business you're using it in, learn about the things you need to know first. And if you want to learn more stuff, cool. If it's finances, you should probably be looking at things like, I don't know, interest rates, changes over time, stuff like that. If you're working in teaching, it's just grades. It's fairly simple. If you're working in statistics, where you're doing a broad, different, using a broad variety of data sets to find a broad variety of different situations and cases and contexts, good luck. Hope you're a math teacher as well, or have a good math background. But you should determine what functions matter to you. You'll also see like pi, and it gives you a little description of it. So returns the value of pi 3.14159 blah blah blah, accurate to 15 digits. Now if you're doing something scientific, 15 digits may not be enough, and in that case this is a limitation of Excel itself. You might need some other software. However, 15 digits is usually good enough for most people in most situations, and that's why they did that. They could go to 1,000,000 digits, but it would take up that much more computing power, memory, hard drive space, so on. That's why they've limited some of these things. So there are some specific things in here that are constants that they've added in. And you can type in any letter and see a bunch of stuff. So equals A, absolute value, for instance. If you've got negatives and positives and you want to compare them, it may make sense to take the absolute value of those negatives and positives. So for instance, we use this in teaching in some cases where we've got a value that the teacher gives and a value that another teacher gives. And you can subtract one from the other to find the difference, to see how close they are. That difference may be negative, it may be positive. If you take the absolute value, you only care, in this case, when you're comparing, about the degree of difference. You don't care about which direction it's in, if that makes sense. You care about the amount of difference. And so the absolute value can help with that. So that's one that I'll occasionally use in teaching. You can see there's stuff like a cosine h, a cotangent h, and I honestly am probably saying those wrong. I don't remember all of them. A sine h, tan tangent, average a, average if s. These are all a bunch of specialized features that, frankly, I don't know all about. Again, learn about the ones that you need to know. And I think that's where we'll stop here. So this is still quite a bit of stuff, but this is working with bigger data sets, pasting, copying over formatting, and understanding the context of the data. So hopefully this was helpful and not too stupidly long. And if it is helpful, then we'll continue on from here. And if it's not, let me know, shoot me an email or whatever, and I'll try and improve these. Okay? All right, thanks.